The Trump administration has cut $2 billion of federal funding to Harvard University and threatening to cut more after Harvard rejected the administration's list of critical reforms they say are necessary to continue receiving taxpayer dollars. Joining us now to discuss is OpenTheBooks.com Deputy Public Policy Editor Rachel O'Brien. Good morning to you, Rachel. Good to see you. Happy Friday.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Harvard gets a ton of money from the federal government. How does that compare, though, to its endowment and how much it charges students to attend the university?
Right. Harvard has sued the Trump administration over this funding cut. And there are some common sense changes they can make to diffuse this standoff. So since the first Trump administration, 2017, Harvard has received $4.4 billion from the federal government. That's about $539 million a year. That is more than Harvard collects from tuition, room, and board in any given year, right? They now give free tuition to anyone whose household income is under $200,000. People get a lot of aid, and so they're getting more money from the federal government than anywhere else. They pay 23 people over $400,000 each. In fact, the 10 highest paid people there all made more than $800,000. So Harvard can afford this kind of generous payment in part because of its tremendous endowment. This endowment is now at $53 billion as of 2024. It's the largest of all the Ivy Leagues. They have plenty of money.
One of the reasons President Trump cut the funding was because Harvard has not disclosed the source and purpose of all the foreign funds it received, including more than $100 million it got from China, which of course raises questions about intellectual property theft. Tell us more about this.
Absolutely. The Trump administration is claiming that the university made incomplete and inaccurate disclosures of foreign funds. They're required to. Universities are required to report payments of more than $250,000 that they get from foreign governments. Since 2017, Harvard has accepted $1.1 billion from foreign sources, including that over $100 million from China. And like you said, that involvement in China, it raises questions about intellectual property theft. The FBI says that China's talent programs, which pay scientists to do research for China, those programs are meant to, quote, incentivize its members to steal foreign technologies needed to advance China's national, military, and economic goals. It says right there, right? The FBI knows this. There's a Harvard professor and chemist, Charles Lieber. He was working for one of these programs in China, China's 1,000 Talents program. He was convicted in 2021 of lying about this work. So there's now a bill in Congress called the Deterrent Act, and this would lower that $250,000 reporting threshold to $50,000 for most countries, but it would go down to a single dollar for nations like China, Iran, Russia, and North Korea. So it passed in the House. 31 Democrats voted for it. It's bipartisan. It needs to pass in the Senate.
And this is not the only thing. This is not the only reason the administration is holding these funds. They're also requiring Harvard, and this is really by law, to end DEI programs and audit programs they say fuel anti-Semitism. So what is the financial relationship between Harvard and Palestinian territories?
Yeah, so Harvard received $1.6 million from entities within the, quote, Palestinian territories. There's no description of where exactly those funds came from or how they were spent. So we know as campuses across the nation were rocked with these extremist protests since the Hamas attack on Israel, October 7th, 2023, that financial relationship should be examined more closely. Showing how that money was spent could speak to the Trump administration's concerns about anti-Semitism being allowed on campus. And then finally, DEI. If Harvard could restrain themselves from promoting ideas that end up leading to campus upheaval and discriminatory and often illegal practices in the workplace, that fight could also diminish considerably before anyone sets foot in the courtroom. But, instead, Harvard and the Trump administration, they are headed into what CNN recently called a titanic clash that could be headed to the Supreme Court over this.
It very well likely could end up in the Supreme Court. That lawsuit, as you mentioned, by Harvard right now underway. All right. Public policy editor of OpenTheBooks.com, Rachel O'Brien, thanks for joining us this morning. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for having me, Jan.